Good and welcome to tonight's shir, which is sponsored kindly by Pinchas Rabin and his wife. They had a granddaughter born to their daughter Adel and her husband David Yeshaya in Morristown, family Sirkind, and the babe was born perhaps Thursday night, but Nikrosh Movi Yisrael Shana. So wish them Mazel Tov, lots of nachas from them and all their family. Also, it's close of Chaim Shmuel Mendel and Chana Reisel for Shleima. I got the name slightly wrong last week. That's Michael Rabin, should have her for Shleima. Here we should have a week of Asura Service. Let's start. So, someone asked me at the beginning of the week, Baruch Hashem, he's recovered from an illness, and he was thinking about making a sort of Shaydor, and he's asking if it has to have to be fleshik, etc., with Hamoitzi, etc. So, in all honesty, there are not very clear guidelines in halacha for what's called a Suda Shaydor, how to do it. And in the Sefer Piskei Teshuvos, in the Siman Reish Yud Tes, somewhere around there, just near the Birchas HaGoimel. So he has there a bit of discussion about it. But he brings a very interesting, he gives a reference to this Sefer Toldos Chaim, not a Sefer I've met before. It has a very interesting idea. That we see that regular korbanos, so you've got different levels. So let's discuss it a little bit. You've got different korbanos, which are called Kodshe Kadoshim and Kadoshim Kalim. Kodshe Kadoshim would be the more sacred ones. They were only if they were eaten, the korban is not eaten at all, but the korban chatos, etc., is eaten only by the kohanim, only in the confines of the azor of the courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash. Kadoshim Kalim are typically permitted to be eaten all over Yerushalayim, and they can be eaten also by Yisraelim, etc., men, women, etc. But here's interesting: a regular korban shlomim, you'd have 2 days to eat it, today and tomorrow, and the night in between. Korban toidah, which is given when a person had an experience for which he wants to, or needs to give thanksgiving. So it would be limited to Yom V'Laylo, just today and Sunday, let's say, and Sunday night. But he wouldn't be able to have any of it on Monday morning, Monday day. So the time span, the shelf life of a korban toidah is much shorter. On top of it, the korban toidah is accompanied by 40 loaves of lechem, 30 of which were matzah, 10 of which were chometz, but actually the volume of the chometz ones was equal to 3 of the matzah ones, which attenuates. It's quite a lot of bread to go through, and the shelf life of the accompanying bread is the same as a korban, which means you've only got to the day and the following evening, but anything which left till the following morning has to be destroyed. So he quotes from Meforshim. Why did Hashem make the korban toidah? Why did he decree the korban toidah should be a shorter time span? That is in order that you should have, because you got a lot of meat, a lot of bread, and you're going to have a lot of guests to your party. So that's the point of the korban toidah, is to encourage more people to be aware and to be in the Thanksgiving for the occasion. Which, just by the way, brings me to, there's a discussion, also the Rebbe has it in letters, whether Hallel is the deraisa or the Rabbanon. And this, although generally we say Hallel is one of the 7 mitzvahs, the Rabbanon, there's a svara to say that the Eibishter made the miracle so that you should say Hallel. And therefore, in a sense, to say that our poskim say that Hallel would be a deraisa. Hashem made something, a special event, a special happening, so that you should say, that you should praise and thank Hashem. All right, let's move on. So there's no set number, if that's okay, coming back to the question. Is there a set amount of guests you have to have for a carbon for a Suda Sedor? No. But the spirit of the idea is the more the better. Let's move on. So someone's asking me about saying Refuah Shlema on Shabbos. So let's go. There's two questions here. One is about praying for someone who's ill, and one is just a wish. I expressed a wish to you, or to whoever it may be, or for Shlem. So now we'll go back to the Gemara, and it says one who visits a person who's ill should say the following: Shabbos hi milizoik. It's a Shabbos, and we will therefore refrain from crying out. Or a refuah kroivelov, the healing is coming, is close to arrive. Remeir says that the merit of Shabbos itself will be a cause for mercy. Yehuda says, a person will say, may the omnipresent have mercy on you, Ve'al Choyle Yisrael, amongst other Eden who are suffering illness. Rabbi Yossi says, which seems to be identical to Rabbi Yehuda. Shevna Ish Yerushalayim says, when you come in, you say Shalom, and when you leave, you say Shabbos Himelizoik or Kreyafu or Kreyavelovoi. Verachim of Merubin, Hashem's mercy is abundant. Veshivstu b'Shalom, and rest, enjoy the tranquility of Shabbos peacefully. Now, this does not seem to be a form of prayer. This seems to be more a social. You're visiting someone who is unfortunately unwell, and you are expressing, you're empathizing, and even in this, there seems to be the restrictions of saying refuah shleim. Now, we'll go now to the Shulchan Aruch. This is in Siman Reish Pei Zayin, where it says you are allowed to visit the ill on Shabbos, but you should not lo yavaka shalem rachamim. You should not plead for mercy for them, as you would normally say. Now, but in case you think this is only about prayer, but read the next few words. Shalidei bakoshas rachamim yoire bechi v'yitzar. Through your expressing your pleading for mercy for them, that will arouse crying and pain. I don't know whether that means for the patient or that means for the person who's davening for them. But either way, it's kind of when you have a thought and then you express it b'dibur, so in words, then it arouses greater emotion, and that's not an appropriate emotion for Shabbos. And instead, you should speak to them in a comforting way, that they shouldn't feel pain. And that's where we have this phrase, Shabbos himilizoik and the Refuah krovel or krevel avoy. So you kind of comfort them that Shabbos is a day where we don't cry and we look forward to healing coming quickly. Having said that, then he says, V'chein hashatz, also the chazan, the bagabe in the shul, when he makes a Misha Beirach, should not say the regular form, the Hamochim Yishlach Refuah, rather Shabbos Himelizak Refuah Kroiv, which is indeed the minhag we have in the Siddur, two Nusachois for Misha Beirach, a Shabbos one and a weekday one. But what I'm seeing here, it seems to be that even on a social level, also the wishing Refuah Shlema seems to be restricted, although I must say, I did look around to find something clear cut, and I didn't find anyone to say that mamish clearly. As I'm on this topic, I'm looking at the Misha Beirach, which is printed in the Alter Rebbe Siddur at a bris, and in the Misha Beirach it says HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yishlach Lo Meher Refuah Shlema B'chol HaMachivarav, etc. Now, there's no distinction in the Siddur whether it's a Shabbos bris or a weekday bris. So the impression is that you say this Lashon on Shabbos also, which the Shar HaKoil, the Rebbe's ancestor, in he says this Svara, he says that That's because until the third day after the bris, the child is not begeder choil, it's not defined as ill, and therefore it's okay to say refuah shleim. Interesting. What is also, though, worth pointing out, that this Mishaberach in the Alter Rebbe Siddur was only introduced in the Siddur which was printed 3 years after his passing, in Tovkov Ein Vav, the Siddur im Dach. It's printed by the Mittler Rebbe. Whereas in the Siddur which was printed in Bechaya, which we now have a copy, presumed to be Shklov Tovkov Samar Gimel, the Mishaberach is not there. In other words, the Siddur, the procedure for a bris is there, but the Mishaberach is not there. Therefore, it weakens a little bit the proof from it. We'll go on to a little bit further on this same topic, and that is in the next simon. That was Reish Pei Zayin. This is Reish Pei Ches, talking about talking about a person fasting if they had a bad dream. And then he says about saying vidui on Shabbos. So you are allowed to say confessional prayer on Shabbos, and it's only not to tachnunim, supplications, to ask for your needs, provision of your needs for parnosa, etc., or refuah l'choile, that you shouldn't be saying that on Shabbos. But expressing remorse for sins, that's fine every day. I don't know the answer. If you're going to ask, why then do we not say it in Krishma Shalamita? I don't know the answer. I don't know, and it didn't do research just now either, so I might be something written very clearly. He goes on to say there that if the person who you wish to pray for is a choyle mesukon, is in life is in danger, and then you are allowed to pray for them on Shabbos, and that may be done even b'tzibur. And similarly, a woman who's struggling to give birth, and therefore there's an imminent danger, so you could daven for them on Shabbos. If there's a person who's ill, but there's not an imminent danger, then you wouldn't be allowed to daven for them on Shabbos, not to say Mishaberach in the normal form, because it can be done later, with after Shabbos. So that's why, in other words, Levorach b'Shabbos with saying the regular, like the weekday nusach. But to say, as we do, Shabbos Himilizak, that's obviously okay. Then he says, what happens if on Shabbos something happens, an event happens, which is warrants asking for rachamim, so then you can do so biyochid, but not b'tzibur. Okay, let's move on. So I got this question from a shliach in Ukraine, and the government there are looking for more soldiers and cracking down on people who are dodging the draft. And the shliach himself is an American citizen, Israeli citizen, whatever. But he's you can be stopped in the street. Show me your documents, and if you don't have any documents to explain why you're not in the army, then they'll tell you to get into the car, and they'll take you to the draft office, whatever it may be, and you may have to stay there until end of Shabbos, whatever, until documents are brought somehow. So it's obviously not a pleasant experience. So therefore he's asking, would it be permitted for them to carry their documents with them? So at this stage, my feeling was it's not a question of a danger. It may be a question of discomfort, and every sympathy for that, but I didn't see it as a danger. And therefore I felt that they shouldn't be carrying their documents with them. But going back in history, there were times where it was actually imperative that you had documents with you, identity documents, and if not, if you were caught without identity documents, would be imprisonment or a substantial penalty. So this was discussed over here in the Piskei Teshuvos he brings from Sfarim from back in the day, and they would allow people to go out on Shabbos with their documents and carrying it in an unusual manner, as inside their hat or under their vest. So it's carried, but not in a normal way. The reason why they allowed this was, number one, relying on the fact that in the smaller towns, we would say we don't have a Rosh Hashanah Min HaTorah because we don't have 600,000 regular users. That's good for a smaller town, which um, they exist today also, yeah. But this is Shvacher in the larger cities. And on the other hand, I understand the larger cities, this business of stopping boys in the street is less of an issue in the currently. That's so number one, because the street is not a Shiram Deraisa. Number two, you're carrying it to Kalachiyad, therefore it's also Drabonon. And to say that it's a Malacha Shein Tzricha Legufa, you don't really need the documents with you. It's really just to ward off the drafters, etc. Others are not so happy about that. So the bottom line is, if it were a danger of a risk, not a danger, if it were a risk of imprisonment because of not having documents, then there is room to permit having the documents on your person in an unusual way, in an unusual manner. So someone asked me during the past week to clarify whether at a Kiddush, do all the cakes and rugelach and the whole variety, crackers, pretzels, do they all need to be covered when Kiddush is made? So we have here two interesting quotes from the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. I'm going to read the second one first. This is in Siman in Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, Siman Ayin Zayin, Hilchos Shabbos, and he says when you make Kiddush, well, a Shabbos meal should have 2 loaves of bread, two whole loaves. Similarly, when you make Kiddush Shabbos morning, and you're just having a moment, just having some cake, etc. So you should have shtayim shleimus. You should have 2 whole ones. And he says, "Kein ro'isi eitzel godel echad." Interesting source. The Kitzur Shulchan Aruch and Shlomo Ganzfried said he saw a godel echad who would on Shabbos he would take 2 pieces of cake for lechem mishnah. And we saw this by the Rebbe, that by the Farbrengens they would prepare a tray, a silver tray, like a bowls type of tray, which was piled high with pieces of very fluffy marble cake, and the Rebbe would take 2 pieces and in a napkin and have that next to him, which he would have for having Kiddush b'Makom Suda. Now, of course, the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch talks about shleimus, whole ones. Do slices of cake count as shleimus? Probably not strictly, but if that's what you have, so you'll make do with that. It may be better if you have crackers available to take 2 crackers, even though they're less than a kazayis. Yeah. It just comes to mind that there's a sefer called Shali Tzion from Ber Lazarov. He was a Lubavitcher Rov in Yerushalayim. I met him in his very old age, and he was a Rov during the mandate, when the British mandate had Yiddish boys in prison, and he has an article there, Tshuva, whether slices of toast can count for lechem mishnah. So you had the Yiddish boys in the British prison, and they had a way of getting toast. Would they be able to use 2 slices of toast for lechem mishnah? It's not for today's discussion. Let's come back. Our main discussion here is: do you have to cover the mezainis? So now, back to the earlier quote on the page, and that's in the Dinim of Kiddush, in Siman Ayin Zayin in the Kitzur. He says that in the morning where you make Kiddush and have some mezainis, it should be covered for the time of Kiddush. So one of the reasons why we cover the chalas is because really, if you have the weekday, if you have a wine and mezainis, which comes first, the bracha should be on the grain before the wine. And here we're making a bracha on the wine before the grain. So there's a bit of a disgrace to the mezainis. So for that reason, we cover that. Well, that logic applies to cake as well as to bread. So now the next quote we have here is from the Shmiras Shabbos Kehilchosa, and he's saying if you have several families around the table, and if each balabos, let's say, is making their own kiddush, well, you don't have to have everyone else cover their chalas when one of the people are making kiddush. He covers his chalas, but not everyone else has to cover them at that time. And imagine a family sitting, someone comes in 10 minutes late, Okay, makes kiddush, very nice, but does everyone have to cover their challah? And the answer is no. But then he says if one is making kiddush for everyone, then all the people's challahs should be covered, even if they are at separate tables. Okay. So that's what he writes in the Panim, in the main text. In the footnotes, he quotes, he's quoting from the Sefer River Ephraim, and then he takes it a bit further, not only by people sitting around for a Shabbos meal where you talk about challahs, but also in a kiddush in a shul where you have mezainis on the tables, that the mezainis should be covered. But then he brings from Rav Shlomo Zalman, with all due respect to the River Beis Ephraim, I'm much more enamored with Reb Shlomo Zalman's general Mahalach, and this detail is not an exception. Reb Shlomo Zalman says that if you have a kiddush and the people at the other end of the room, they are not, they have well, then he says they're not going to have wine in any case, so they don't have to cover their mezainis. Because if it's got to do with why do you make a bracha on him and not on him, well, that's only for the one who's making the hagafen, or drinking, but if they have wine. But if they're not having any wine, then they do not need to cover the mezainis. And so that's a practical thing that when they near the people who are making kiddush on wine, then the mezainis should be covered. What about if you're making kiddush on other liquids? Should you be covering the mezainis? There is a svara that it should be. He brings here loshen. One of the reasons for covering the challahs is we're only going to reveal the Shabbos food once we've made kiddush. We said already Mekadesh Shabbos. So then we're going to then expose. Oh, now we've got food to cover Shabbos. Well, Shlomo Zalman is saying that's more at the nighttime kiddush rather than the daytime kiddush, because you don't say the bracha mekadosh Shabbos in the day. You just say Be'Prag Gofen. Okay. So according to just to take that, just assess that according to this svara, if you're making kiddush on not on wine, then wait a minute, then you should still cover it. All the more you should cover the mezainis because of shilayir beboshte. Why are you making a shahakal instead of a mezainis first? Yeah, okay. So no difference. So in conclusion to that, from just assessing at the moment, that also if you're making kiddush on Chamar Medina, you'd also, even by day, you'd still cover the mezainis, which is right near you. Right, let's move on. So someone's asking whether the hot plate, which nowadays many of us have instead of the traditional blech. And as you know, the word blech is a Yiddish word for tin. So we would cover the Torah in the Shulchan Aruch, the Mishnah talks about grufo ktuma, that in order as a deterrent that you shouldn't come to tamper with the fire in the stove, so you'd have to either cover it, that's called ktuma, cover it with soot or with ash, or to rake it out. So the covering of the stove with a sheet of metal, that's the equivalent of ketuma, of covering the fire with ash. Very well. Now, what about a plug-in? So there's nothing covered. So the general view taken is that that's the same. It's the same as the blech, and the what is, since it's got no, well, it's not normal to cook on it, and there's nothing to adjust either, which is another consideration. Therefore, it's okay to just plug it in and use that as your equivalent of a blech. Now, in the Piskei Teshuvos, he writes similar, that the general view is that that's fine, just plug it in, that's good enough, since it's not used for cooking, only to warm up or to keep things warm. But there are those who would put a sheet of silver foil or something over the plug-in hot plate. But minhag ha'olam, the general consensus is not so, and that's good enough. Let's move on. Number 6, which I don't have on the I don't have on the screen. Number 6, last week, I went to a hardware store on Old Hill Street, and I bought 2 glasses for forthcoming chasanas, Bezras Hashem. So the guy behind the counter says, you don't table them. So I told him that we use the cup actually, because in the Welt, many people, they use a silver cup for the brachas, and then they take another glass and they break it separately. I told him our minhag is we use the actual glass for the brachas and for wine, for drinking, and afterwards we empty, have someone to drink it, and we break that glass. Okay. So, but then it also was, again, we had this past week, I was at a course of training for Siddur Kiddushin, and it came up this question: is there a chiyuv to tovel the glass? So there is people know that disposable dishes, people are not particular to tovel, but that's not the disposable dishes themselves. They are in quality a poor quality. They are disposable in quality, not only in, so to speak, in intent. Here, the glass is something which you're going to have for years. It's just your intent is to break it, to use it only once. So the pashtus, it does need to be told with a bracha. Although I saw now, as I was rummaging around, I saw that in the Sefer Psachim and Shuvas, he recommends to tovel it without a bracha. Whilst we're talking about this, there is as we know, every Shabbos, before you make Kiddush, you make sure to rinse out the cup. And so also the one which is used under the chuppah should be rinsed out before using it under the chuppah. Because it is a kos shabrocha, and you have a whole list of criteria for kos shabrocha, and one of them is that it should be rinsed before. Let's move on to the next question. So here we have a shliach who, Baruch Hashem, is in a fortunate position that if he's in a small town, several of the local balabatim, whatever, have clubbed together and they've bought a building. And as is common in that part of the world, that the zoning would have that the various places of worship would be all together. So you have, I know I've seen that also in Detroit. You have the shul, and then you have the Havdalah church, and you may have a mosque nearby, and the zoning is that they all come together. So in this worship zoning, his Balabatim Chabad purchased a building, and this has got several units. Some of them are still used for commercial, but you can use them for worship if you wish. And one of the tenants happens to be a mosque. So now the question is, am I allowed to, as a landlord, have a mosque as a tenant? That was the question. So there's a difference between Islam and Christianity. It's perfect time of the year to be discussing this. So now we have in the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch in Siman Kuf Chof Ches. That's all about Birkas Kohanim. So in Sifnun Aleph, you can see it on the screen. Kohen Shehemir Dosoy. If a Kohen had defected from Yiddishkeit, afilu l'das Yishmaelim, she'einom oivdim avodah zarah. Even if he converted to Islam, which is not idolatry, konsuhu chachomim lios mechulol mikudushose. He has been penalized to be downgraded from his kedusha. Ve'einu noisa kapov, and therefore he will not be duchening. Ve'einu koya b'tei rishon, you wouldn't give him the first aliyah. Who shall yosat tshuva if he hasn't done tshuva? Yosat tshuva, if he did do tshuva, afilahem dosel avodah, even if he had converted and committed to a faith of avodah zarah, now he's relented. Okay, so why I brought this here is, meanwhile, that the view that Islam is not avodah zarah. Now, what would happen if one of the tenants was actually a church? And going into all the details, but let's say it's a church which does have icons, etc. So now This is there is a here an issue that you're not allowed to accommodate Avodah Zarah. And so to have an Avodah Zarah brought into your premises is not okay. And this you have in Shulchan Aruch in Yededeya. You can see in Simon Kufn and Aleph, this on the right of the screen. Af shebemoker she'itiru lahaskir, lo yehitiru ela lo'oitza v'chayotze b'o. When you are permitted to rent out premises, a room, a house, to a goy, that's only for storage. You wouldn't be allowed to rent out for dwelling. Because the goy will bring in his getchkes, his icons, his idols, and that's going to be in your house. You're accommodating those idols. That's the shitta of the Mechaber Rabbi Yosef Karo. Change the font. That's another Ramah. Nowadays, it's customary to rent out to goyim even for dwellings. Because it's not common for people to bring getchkes, to bring icons into their homes. So far, this would be, if that's true, that would be enough of a heter for a domestic dwelling. But if your tenant was a place of worship, I don't think that heter would carry true. Now the Yud Zayin is a reference to the Shach on the margin, which you have now on the left of the screen. So the Ramah had said, why are you allowed to have goyish tenants? Because it's not common for them to bring getchkes, to bring idols into their homes. So the Shach says, kosher, I don't understand. I've seen that it's a regular thing, and people goyim have these icons in their homes. And it's difficult to say that because the goyim now are not authentic idol worshippers, therefore the idol is not an authentic idol. Then he goes on to suggest, perhaps in the times of the Ramah, which was not much longer, not so much before him, 100 years before, whatever, perhaps in those times it wasn't so customary for goyim to bring icons into their homes. But then he says, I have a different explanation. What's the issue? That you shouldn't be accommodating. Who now owns this home? Is it your home? And he says the following: It's true that our view in halacha is that a rental is not a purchase. However, but in the civil law, and we are bound by their law, and in their law, a rental contract is just as strong as a sale, to the point that afim nofal basis shel maskir eina yochel lohitziyot. Let's say in halacha, if I rented out premises to someone and then I myself became homeless, so then the halacha allows me to evict my tenant, so that I should and take it back for myself, because it doesn't seem to be morally correct that I should be homeless when I have a tenant who's occupying a property of mine. In civil law at that time, that wouldn't carry. And if your house fell down, you wouldn't be able to evict your tenant. Therefore, the contract of rental is so binding, so solid, that you wouldn't be allowed to evict the tenant during the period of tenancy, habi kemecher. Therefore, it's like you've sold it. Once you've sold it, then you cannot be held to account for accommodating of it. It's not your house. It's been rented out, and therefore it's not yours, it's not your premises. So that's the teretz which the Shach gives. That why is it okay to rent out premises to a tenant who will bring Avodah Zarah? Because a rental is in civil law like a sale, and therefore it's not you're not accommodating the Avodah Zarah. Then he brings another very interesting explanation. He brings from the Ravon, also one of the mid Rishonim, and he says that this is interesting, that since you didn't have to pay rates, you have land, but you have to pay rates to the government. So then it's not exclusive of your premises. If you have to pay rates, so then we'll say that according because of this, it means that 10%, whatever the rate may be, it doesn't matter. But as a result, it's not exclusively yours. It's partly clearly belonging to the government, and as a result, you're not accommodating the Avodah Zarah. It's the Goyisha element which is accommodating the Avodah Zarah. So this is an interesting twist on this. So all right, so if it but to have a church as a tenant. So according to the Ramah, it wouldn't be allowed because his whole excuse is because it's not common for them to bring in getchkas. According to the Shach, there seems to be a little bit more. There seems to be some room to allow it. Certainly, if you got the property with a sitting tenant, which is a church, you're going to have a difficult task to get them out. It'd be diplomatically, it will be quite a difficult thing to do. Right now, well, I've been asked this numerous times about you, and you go into a hotel room and you open a drawer and you see there a book which of Christian worship, etc. Are you allowed to leave it there, etc.? So now we have the end of that if you notice, which I didn't read before, and that's what you have on the screen. If you rent premises from a goy, yesh lahachmir sheloi lahaniach shom avodah zarah shel goy. You can rent a room, and inside the room there's a getchke of some sort. So you should be machmir not to leave it there. Now, reading those words, yesh lahachmir, you have to read this carefully. It means that min hadin, it's okay to leave it there, but it's better to take it away. The source of this psak is from the Hagos Oshri, which we're going to read now. Rabbi Ephraim ben Yitzchak says that if a Jew rents a house from a goy, the Jew is not allowed to leave the Avedas Kechavim, not allowed to leave the idols in place. For that matter, if he rented a cow, let's say an ox, and if he had driven the animal with a burden on Shabbos, so then the Jew is punishable, chayav chatos, because schidus kanyuktsas, because your rental becomes like yours. Now here's just the opposite of what we just read. We just read that, no, actually not. We were saying that the rental becomes like an ownership. So here the Rabbeinu Ephraim is saying when you rent premises, it's as if you own the premises, and therefore if there's an idol, so you are accommodating this idol. If you rent an ox, so it becomes yours. If it's yours, your animal's not allowed to work on Shabbos. I just find this where he says the word chayav chatos. I find that difficult because there's no chayav chatos. There's lamates melachos for which you are if you violate them, skila and b'shogeg b'chayav chatos. But then mechamer leman yanuach shercha b'chamirecha. Say, but it's not chayav chatos. It doesn't have to bring a cause. No skila, no korban chatos. So that's curious. But meanwhile, so he's taking this. Rabbi Ephraim is taking a view that by renting a premises, it becomes yours, and therefore you're accommodating avodah zarah there. Ve'ein nira. The Hagos Oshri. This he always ends up where he got it from. This is from the Sefer Or Zarua of Rabbi Yitzchak of Vienna. So he says ve'ein nira. I don't buy it. That you're renting doesn't mean that you're becoming a balabas, and because in halacha rental is not an ownership. Okay, you should. It's toivli zor. You should be careful about it and avoid leaving. So if you rent premises and there is an avodah zarah there, so then you should, if possible, take it out and put it away. Now the question here is, practically, people have asked me this question. You come to a hotel, and what are you going to do with that thing? To go now and get rid of it, I think you're risking Chil Hashem, that it'll become known that Jewish tenants, they destroy the books of other worship in the hotel rooms. I don't think that's a good idea to be able to, to get publicity on that. On the other hand, it's not comfortable to have it in your bedroom. I don't know, I would, and to take it away and put it back, I don't know, it's difficult. I would say perhaps leave it in the bathroom. Don't know whether how that would go down, but just leave it where it is. I don't know. Difficult one. Right. Yeah. Let's move on. Number 9. May I prune a fruit tree? So this I did find in I have a sefer called Shmiras Guf Nefesh. Very good sefer. All these stuff which have got to do with health issues, as in how do you say, in ruach ra, etc. And as we know, the issue of chopping down a fruit tree. So so it's written down in the Torah. But then if it's more economical for wood than for fruit, in Torah you are allowed to demolish it because it's not like bal tashchis, it's not being wasteful, and still there's an element of sakana. So generally we're very, very careful about this inyan of not chopping down a fruit tree. But he does bring here from a sefer called Chikrei Lev, who addresses this, that's all very well if it's done in a destructive way. But if it is for propagation, for pruning, then that's not a problem. Now, anyone who learns a bit of Mishnayos, you see that it was very common to you have a whole halacha about a kerem, about a vineyard which is planted, the trees are too close to one another. And so as far as Kilayim, it says because it's destined to be removed. It was a perfectly normal thing that to plant saplings near one another, and then at a later stage to replant them. And so pruning is also comes under propagation, and that's not destructive, and so it's not really a shaila at all. So that's okay. All right. Now the next question which I have on the list is Adova Haposhut, but just for the entertainment value, that a person asks me that he's let's say in New York for Shabbos. Sorry, he is away from his family. Let's say he is in Los Angeles, and his family are in New York. And just before Shabbos in Los Angeles, he looks on his phone, his smartphone, and he sees that the cholent in New York, the crock pot wasn't switched on. So you've got a smart socket, and you can see from hundreds of miles away, and he can switch it on. So is he allowed to switch on the cholent when for him it's not Shabbos, and for the other people it is Shabbos, for the people who are going to eat the cholent? And the answer is obviously yes. It's Dover Poshut, and this is years ago when we used to have fax machines. So this was a common shaila. Are you allowed to send a fax from a place where it isn't Shabbos to a place where it is Shabbos? And so we used to get faxes on Friday evening from New York when by us it was already Shabbos, and it was sent out from New York when it's not Shabbos yet. And the fact that the man in New York is going to be activating a printer in London, that's not a problem because it's for Shabbos goes according to where the person is, and for him it's not Shabbos. That's not a problem. There is a different problem I think we may have discussed, that for me to ask someone to do this, for the people in someone in New York to ask someone in California, can you do a malacha for me? When for me it's already Shabbos, that's a different problem. There's a problem of shlichus, and I'm struggling with that. People are not so careful about this, but there seems to be an issue. How can I have someone, I'm sitting in New York already making Kiddush, and my extension of my hands are in California, are doing a malacha. It's shlichus, it's my hands at a long, so for me it's already Shabbos. Okay, let's move on. So, common question about using Meiser money to buy Sforim. So the idea of giving Meiser is mentioned in Shulchan Aruch, and this is seen as a budget for tzedakah. Basically, Meiser is a budget for tzedakah. How much are you expected to help the mitzvah to help other Yidden? How much are you expected? So you've got a ceiling of Meiser. Is a chomesh. Okay. Now, the way it's written in Shulchan Aruch is that you are allowed to use Maisa money for other mitzvahs also, not only for tzedakah, but also for other mitzvahs, which are voluntary mitzvahs. So I cannot use my Maisa money to buy myself a mezuzah, to buy myself tefillin, to buy myself wine for kiddush, that I cannot use. It's all very beautiful and holy, but it's not for it's a duty. It's my I cannot use by the way, there's a very important mitzvah which some people neglect. There's a mitzvah to pay debts. Hey, priyas bal choiv mitzvah. It's a mitzvah to pay debts. So someone might think, oh, it's a mitzvah to pay debts. I owe money. I'll use my Maisa money to pay debts. And you ain't odom pereach of Maisa. You can't pay debts with Maisa money. So Maisa can only be used for voluntary mitzvahs. Right. So now let's take a look here in Dinim of Tzedakah. So we have here from the Shach and Sifkot and Gimel and Simon Reish Mem Tes. He quotes from the Mashal and the Drisha in the name of Moreinu Rav Menachem Meil Tzedek. That was his name. And a mitzvah which comes your way. So let's say to be a sandik, or to be bring a chosn and kala under the chuppah. It looks like perhaps people would pay for the privilege of being the ontefira for a kala, chosn kala. Let's say they didn't have parents, so they would pay for the wedding, and they would also be honored to be the ontefira. And then he says, you can use the Omaisa for that. And he says also to buy sforim, lilmoid bohem, to learn from them, or lahashilon laacherim lilmoid bohem, and also to loan them to others, to learn from them. Im loy hoya bechoiles v'yodai v'loy hoya oisa mitzvah yochel liknes min ha'maisa. Here's a very important point, that this is all true if you don't have the means to do that mitzvah otherwise, then you can use your Maisa money. So it's not a free for all. This idea of using Maisa money for voluntary mitzvahs, well, so then this is because assuming that you don't have the ability to use regular funds, so then you're allowed to use your Maisa money to buy Sforim, and you can use this Sforim for learning. Even that, so now here there's this Psokim and Chuvas, which qualifies that. Now that's true, only Sforim, which you need for learning, and without your Maisa money, wouldn't have been able to buy them. To buy Sforim, just to fill your shelves, there's no mitzvah. Ein bozeh shum mitzvah. Adarabah, the contrary, it's a disgrace for the Sforim. They're standing embarrassed in the cupboard and not being used. I'm not sure whether the Rebbe would agree with that. The Rebbe pushed for buy smaller Sforim, and there's always this famous story of Tzemach Tzedek, the Rebbe Marash. Do you use a Sforim which you have already? And the Rebbe pushed there should be plenty of Sforim in the houses, and hopefully that will spur people to use them. But that's true. But to use Maisa money for Sforim, which just to build up your library, that doesn't seem to be okay. We're only talking about Sforim which you actually need for your learning. Now, in this question, can you use Maisa money for other mitzvahs or only for tzedakah? As I said, the Ramos says you could use it for other things. Others disagree. Here we have a very interesting kind of source in the Alter Rebbe's Siddur, in Seder Birchas Hanehenin. The rule is if you have a celebration of a simcha, which is just your own, the broch is shechionu. If it's a shared simcha, the broch is hatayva hametiv. So now we have the following. A fellow found a treasure trove. So then he would make the bracha hatoiv v'hametiv. Why is it a shared? He found treasure trove for himself. The answer is because now that he's become wealthier, so then the poor of his community will also, he's now become of greater means. So therefore he will be obliged to help his community that much more. Now, what if the case of someone who inherited his fortune? And there we said, the answer is there. That's not a toiva for Aniya Yisrael, because first of all, the father was also obliged to give tzedakah to the aniyim. Now, as far as wealth in the community, father had £500,000, and now the son has the £500,000. The community hasn't become any wealthier. It's just that it's been transferred from one to the other. You can say that now he has inherited £500,000. Now he has to give a lot of Meiser money, but the Meiser money, the son would have been able to spend it on other mitzvah expenses, not necessarily for the poor, and therefore it's not an inevitable that the poor will benefit from the fact that he now has a duty to give Meiser. So we see the Alter Rebbe here has accepted that shitta, that you can use the Meiser money not necessarily for the poor, but also for other communal needs or for other mitzvah needs, right? Someone put here a very good point. I'd mentioned about putting that book in the bathroom. Often the case is that you're talking about something which has the Tanakh and it has the whatever you call it, the testicle, whatever. So then that would, but to put them in both in the bathroom would not be appropriate. Yeah, I take your point, and therefore I guess just leave it where it is and just ignore it. Thank you for pointing that out. Let's move on to, I think, the last point which we have on the list for today is about an Aron Kodesh. So does an Aron Kodesh need to have a door and a curtain? So in the Sharet Shuvah, that's the commentary of the Shulchan Aruch in the Dinim of Beis HaKnesses, so he quotes from the Sefer Charles Yeshua Zera Emes. Zera Emes was an Italian postic about 300 years ago, and he discusses that even when you have a very beautiful door of the Aron Kodesh, you should still have a pareches, you should still have a curtain in front of it, which, by the way, I've seen places where they don't have it. I was in a Tunisian shul in Paris several years ago. They just had these metal doors, very beautiful, but they did not have perhaps they had a curtain inside, I don't know. Here the question is the other way around. So the Zera Emes says, in addition to doors, you need to have a curtain. Here the fellow says, I have a curtain, do I need to have a door? My feeling is that you do need to have a door, because the Sefer Torah needs to be in a chest, in a box. I call it an Aron Kodesh. That's the kind of protection you can have for very short term. You can have it just wrapped in a talus, but that's very that's for short term. But really, it should be in a box. I think a box without a front door is not called a box. It's open. It's exposed. Right? So you got a curtain in front, but that I don't see it as a proper Aron if it doesn't have a door. Right. Someone's suggesting that the whole book is Nas and Nevela. I don't know. Women doctors. I just want to finish off. It's today was my Yom HaLedes, and I was thinking of something which tried to do a shofar. Now there is this weekly shir is aired on the website called Anash.org. That's aired weekly. And since the Kinos HaShluchim, Anash.org have started producing a magazine. Now, I've for years been looking at concerned about the fact that there is a Kfar Chabad magazine for the Hebrew readers, but an English reader, a regular magazine, there hasn't been for years. There is the Nishei newsletter, which comes out periodically, but that's focusing also on Noshim. Then you have the Der, which is a beautiful monthly, which has got a lot of interesting tochen. It's focusing very much on the Rebbe, the Rabbeim. It doesn't necessarily have articles which will kind of be addressing contemporary issues, which I think there's a value in such a kind of thing that people can read and perhaps have even letters to the editor, etc., to address contemporary issues of the Chabad community. And I see this as a welcome thing that there should be a weekly and so this is what they're looking towards, not just a chazorah of what was been on the website or the news on the website for the past week, but also to have Toichendica articles which you can also sit on Shabbos and whatever with a cup of tea and read them. So I would like to promote this, that it should be available in the UK, and hopefully I'll be able to work out something in prices, etc., how the people can get their subscriptions and how it should come in. Like the Derher is distributed here. People pay subscriptions instead of everyone getting it in the post individually, which is much more expensive. It comes in a package, and each Chabad community, someone will give it out to the people there and to the subscribers. So I'm thinking on the similar lines, and if there's an interest, hopefully. So to try to promote this, Anash. So I wish you a good Woch, and we should hear Besuras Tovis and the Ika Besura Besuras Hageula Simchas Olam Al Rishon. A good Woch.
Good luck.